If I asked you what's the most iconic Sesame Street sketch, what would you say? Perhaps you'd mention one of Ernie and Bert's quarrels, one of Kermit's newsflashes, or the time the Count brainwashed Grover into giving him an excessive amount of hot dogs. Not that last one? Okay. Well, I'd argue that some of Sesame Street's non-Muppet sketches are just as iconic as the ones that feature the Muppets. From the Ladybug Picnic, to the King of Eight, to the Pinball Number Count series, there are so many incredibly famous animated and live-action Sesame Street segments. And easily one of the most iconic of all time are the numerosity sketches. And if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, the way they all end certainly will. A baker proudly sings about the tray of desserts he's holding before tripping and falling and making a huge mess. Despite being a simple gag character, there's more to this baker's story than you may think, with a fascinating behind-the-scenes history dating back to the very beginning of Sesame Street and ending with the clumsy baker's segments getting pulled from the air. This is the story of Sesame Street's baker, one of the most iconic running gag characters in the history of the series. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Muptown Funk. As always, I'm your host Ty, and welcome to another episode of Sesame Street Deep Dive, the series where we break down the history of Sesame Street characters, well known and obscure. Last April, wow, that was a long time ago, we talked about Cookie Monster, and I'm very excited to be back today with a far more obscure character, but one that is, ironically, still very closely associated with desserts. So, let's get started. When Jim Henson was first brought on to work on Sesame Street, he was tasked with creating segments featuring Muppet characters. But he also signed on to create non-Muppet original short films for the series. The first live-action segments Henson wrote were simple counting films. Each one would start with a choir of children counting from 1 to 10 to a melody written by Joe Raposo. After counting from 1 to 10 and then from 10 to 1, the kids would start counting off numbers, with each number flashing by the screen and eventually stopping on the number that would be featured in the segment. This kept in an element of surprise, and you would never know which number would be focused on until the kids stopped and started singing about it. If you were me, this frequently jump-scared you as a child. Fun fact, the numbers in these sketches were actually hand-drawn by Jim Henson himself. And after being told what number the segment would feature, the sketch would turn into a series of brief live-action segments showcasing an item and how many of them were present. These would include toys, animals, body parts, Muppets, and across the 10 segments made in this style, featuring all the numbers 1 through 10, several characters and concepts would be reused. For example, a professor character appears in the Song of Six and Song of Seven segments, presenting 6 squares and then 7 circles. Another recurring actor was a young boy who presented across several episodes 1 wind-up toy, 2 ice cream cones, 4 wind-up toys, 8 blocks, and 10 wind-up toys. And then there's my personal favorite, this guy, who, in almost every segment, opened a door revealing a different live animal behind it. This includes 1 cow, a full, real cow, 2 turtles, 3 crocodiles, who are very clearly real crocodiles. Can't believe they got real crocodiles there, guys. 4 fish, 5 frogs, 6 cats, 7 spiders, 8 puppies all crammed in a trapdoor down there, 9 mice, and he wasn't in the 10 episode. He was not in the 10 sketch. My disappointment is immeasurable and my day is ruined. Also appearing in several segments is Jim Henson's son, Brian. Jim Henson himself appears juggling ping pong balls in the Song of Three, and of all characters, the only Muppet to present a segment is Rolf, who counts off 9 fireflies in his only ever Sesame Street appearance. While nowadays these would be seen as fun cameos from the crew and other Muppets, back then it was simply them filling out these sketches with people that could do it. But the only person to appear in all 10 of these segments was the baker, who appeared at the very end of each, carrying a different dessert before tripping and falling. The baker was portrayed by stuntman Alex Stevens, who, over his long career, performed stunts and was stunt coordinator for several projects, working on such high-profile films as Superman, Goodfellas, and being the stunt coordinator for Splash. I can truly never escape the mermaids, can I? As you can see, Stevens had a pretty significant career, and he was even the president of the East Coast Stuntsman Association for several years. While Stevens was the one taking the tumble at the end of each of these segments, his voice was actually provided by Jim Henson himself.
2 chocolate cream pies.
Actually, because of this, I always thought it was Jim Henson himself taking the fall as a kid, and if you were also in that boat, please let me know in the comments. Across the 10 numerosity sketches, the baker carries the following items: 1 wedding cake, 2 chocolate cream pies, 3 birthday cakes, 4 root beer floats, 5 fancy fruit cakes, 6 strawberry shortcakes, 7 pumpkin pies, 8 raspberry pudding desserts, 9 coconut custard pies, and 10 chocolate layer cakes. This poor guy cannot catch a break. The numerosity number 2 segment would be used in Sesame Street's first ever test pilot, and once the show began airing, the rest of the sketches would follow suit, airing all throughout the first season and continuing for many years to come. While Henson himself originally storyboarded these sketches under the name Numerosity, and the Children's Television Workshop identified them as simply Henson and then the number they featured, they're often referred to simply as the Baker sketches, including on Sesame Street's YouTube channel itself. It really goes to show you just how famous the baker part of these segments is. And while these sketches are well loved, Joan Gans Cooney, the founder of the Children's Television Workshop, mentioned in an interview in 1970 that she wasn't a big fan of the baker falling at the end. She mentioned that this sketch stuck around because the show has a significant male audience, and as she put it, banana peel humor is very popular with male viewers ages 4 and up. However, children under 2 were actually concerned for the safety of the baker, fearing that he hurt himself when he tripped. Eventually, in 1987, after season 19 of Sesame Street, the numerosity sketches would be removed from the show for this exact reason, out of concern that they were too violent and perhaps a child would try to replicate the baker falling down the stairs and hurt themselves. Despite being pulled from the show's rotation in the late 80s, the Baker sketches are so iconic that they continue to be referenced still to this day, primarily in anniversary specials celebrating the history of the series. In 2004, for Sesame Street's 35th anniversary special, The Street We Live On, the numerosity number 10 sketch made a special reappearance, with the Baker segment being completely unaltered, save for a few brand new sound effects added in. Only 2 years later, in 2006, the numerosity song would be reused for a new series of sketches featuring CGI ribbons counting from 1 to 10, and then kids cranking a jack-in-the-box 1 to 10 times, and then the jack-in-the-box would pop out at the according number. You know, honestly, I think that's scarier than a guy falling down the stairs. Also, throughout the 2000s, the numerosity sketches appeared in the old school DVDs, the 40th anniversary Sesame Street DVD, and several of them were eventually posted to Sesame Street's official YouTube channel. So, despite the Jim Henson Red Book blog saying that these were removed out of fear of being too violent, it's clear that Sesame Street isn't afraid of referencing them or showcasing them, especially for anniversary purposes. They are an incredibly important and iconic part of the series after all. And speaking of anniversaries, Sesame Street celebrated a big one in 2019, 50 years, and they referenced the Baker sketches on several occasions this year. First off, the Sesame Street 50th Anniversary DVD, 50 Years and Counting, featured an insanely cool Easter egg. If you go to the scene selection page for the first DVD in this set, you'll see a mosaic pattern featuring parts of several Sesame Street characters. The only one of these in color is the Count, who appears 3 times, but the third one is missing his fangs and instead has a mustache. If you click on this mustache, you'll be brought to a secret Easter egg on the DVD, a blooper reel for the Baker sketches. This features over 4 minutes of the poor guy falling down in a wide variety of ways. Unfortunately, as this is archival footage, it doesn't have audio. It's even labeled as such on the DVD itself, but it's insanely cool to see, and I can't believe that they included this when the sketches were originally pulled out of fear of being too violent. It's such a cool Easter egg. Luckily, the whole thing has been uploaded to YouTube if you want to check it out. But easily the coolest Baker reference in the modern day came in Sesame Street's 50th anniversary celebration special. This special featured a wide variety of returning human cast members and returning Muppets, many of whom hadn't been seen in decades. In one part of the special, host Joseph Gordon-Levitt, he should use his real name, I like that name, Robin, leaves Hooper's store only to be met by the stumbling baker carrying 10 chocolate layer cakes, which he announces in a reuse of Jim Henson's original audio.
10 chocolate layer cakes.
He trips and falls off screen, only for Gonger to appear floating by on a balloon, saying, "Sorry, Mr. Baker." Gonger, how could you? How could you trip this man? Do you know how many times he's fallen down in his life and you had to add to the tally? For this appearance, the Baker was portrayed by actor Chris Guttadaro, and as I previously mentioned, that audio is the original Jim Henson track. Additional photos of him were taken behind the scenes, posing with Cookie Monster, Gonger, and his 10 chocolate layer cakes. After this special aired, season 50 of Sesame Street began, which continued to feature several references to the show's history, and in the 14th episode of the season, the Baker is once again referenced. In a scene where Elmo and Abby are drawing, they mention that Alan fell over earlier in the day carrying 5 root beer floats, which they sing in the same way as the original song. They then ask Alan to pose as if he were falling so that they could draw him. Outside of the numerosity sketches and those anniversary references, the Baker hasn't made any other appearances over the years. It's not like they're making Falling Baker merchandise, although I would buy any that existed. Some company get on that, please. Super 7? Maybe? But there is one reference to the Baker in outside media, and it's pretty strange. In 1998, a Sesame Street computer game was released called Grover's Travels, which was, for some reason, a Gulliver's Travels parody, and it at one point featured Grover encountering the Twiddleputians. Of course, a reference to the Lilliputians from the original story. At one point in the game, 3 Twiddleputians, trying to cheer up the Twiddleputian governor, present him with an ice cream sundae, singing about it before, of course, falling down the stairs.
Maraschino cherry, 3 vanilla fudge cones, 2 juicy bananas. 1 super duper twiddle banana surprise.
But there you have it, guys. That is the full history of the iconic Sesame Street Baker, one of the most famous running gag characters in Sesame Street's history, who appeared for almost 20 years before leaving the air, only to be referenced again and again and again in anniversary specials afterwards. This is an iconic character, an iconic part of Sesame Street's history, and I was shocked to learn that these sketches were the first ever ones that Jim Henson created for Sesame Street that were live-action short films. This is a character we all remember, and will all remember him for many years to come. Despite having so little screen time, he really made an impact on so many people. And here's hoping one day he can successfully carry those root beer floats without falling. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching another episode of Sesame Street Deep Dive. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye now.
6 strawberry